Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin. This podcast is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. So marketers and sellers all want customer content, but marketing teams are really stretched thin and it's difficult to create and distribute those customer stories. That's where Testimonial Hero comes in. They're a customer storytelling agency that creates both video and written content and works as an extension of your marketing team. Check them out at testimonialhero.com. Today, I'm joined by Julia Winn, who is the head of marketing at Air Traffic Control, and we're talking about how sales and marketing both need to drop the ego and actually get aligned. We talk about the common pitfalls that revenue teams fall into when it comes to alignment, and we also dive into how to ruthlessly prioritize as part of a small marketing team. On to the episode. Hey, Julia, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dustin.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you on the show. Looking forward to it. We're going to talk a little bit about sales and marketing alignment, where it goes wrong, where it can go well. But one thing you mentioned before we started recording was that both sales and marketing might need to drop the ego to make this work. So what do you mean by that? And yeah, how do they do that?
Yeah, I think it's all about the hubris around attribution, right? So when you have a sales and a marketing team who are maybe being compensated based on what they're bringing in versus having people that are like, nope, we're all working towards the same thing, then I think really amazing things can happen. I just followed up with someone I worked with at Prelude, which was the best sales marketing alignment that I've ever had. And I think he was noting that from day one, we could respect each other's kind of domain expertise enough to be able to say, okay, stay in my lane, but also what do you need help with? And it doesn't really matter who sourced this particular deal, pipe, whatever. Let's just all work together to either get it over the finish line or kind of get it in the door. So that was a wonderful experience. And I've had bad experiences as well, but that one kind of reinvigorated my passion for sales marketing alignment. So I'm very happy about that one.
Yeah, basing it on attribution is tricky because it's not an exact science.
Right.
Like we wish it was. We wish, maybe they responded to a BDR, but did they see 3 ads that you ran and saw a webinar you did or a video or your podcast ahead of time?
Exactly.
And if so, how do you attribute it? So that's always really tough. I guess just on the incentive side, then less so attribution, then let's take the organization you were in where it worked really well. Mm-hmm. How were the incentives structured so that marketing and sales weren't pitted against each other and we're actually working together there?
Yeah, I think we didn't focus on a lot of outbound. I think sometimes it gets confusing when you have inbound and outbound. And say you have a team of SDRs who are being compensated potentially more for going out and trying to find a cold outbound deal versus then responding to the people that are coming in the door. So I think at Prelude, we certainly had a pretty typical commission structure for sales, and marketing is not based on that. But I think everything seemed very equal in terms of what the comp was org-wide. I think Will and Alex did a really great job with that. So there was no kind of like wondering, oh my gosh, like how much are they making? And when I think outbound is great, like I love it, but when we're not focusing on that and we can really focus on the people coming in through the door and everyone is gearing in that same direction, then everything seemed to work out well for both of us.
Yeah, over incentivizing outbound sounds nice in theory, because I won't say it's harder, but it's hard to get those leads, right? It's hard to get them on a call. That being said, it's going to have a longer sales cycle, way lower win rate than inbound. Yep. So if anyone looks at it objectively and they don't think about the compensation side and attribution side, it seems a no-brainer in that situation to go inbound. But yeah, I get what you mean. I think part of it too is marketing and salespeople, there's a lot of turnover and they want to show they're doing their job and they're hitting their targets, and that's where that disconnect might come in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also people that are coming inbound. It doesn't mean they're always going to fit your core ICP. So it's like, how are you going to nurture that person, that stakeholder who's come in versus this person that might look really beautiful on paper because they have the persona that you want at the organization. But as you said, like those sales cycles, that amount of time that is going out, that potentially, depending on how poorly or you're doing it, brand reputation hit that can happen when outbound teams are not doing their job properly. Like when that goes away, a lot of really great things can happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. You're in a situation where sales and marketing leader, right off the jump, it worked. Like you said, you two respected your own domain authority, had respect and wanted to work together. That's maybe the exception to the rule in a lot of cases, I would think. And there is this headbutting. So I'm curious then There's no easy answer to this, but for people who are stuck in that situation where you are button heads, maybe you're not the CMO, but you're leading marketing, how do you get that conversation going to actually start fixing that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this actually. And I think part of it is you have to have someone that is in more of an MDR role versus a typical SDR. So
Yeah.
when you have someone who is typically going to be on the more junior side, who is trying to split their time between outbound and inbound, will always lose. It will always lose because they are not just solely focused on that. So at one of the roles where I was at Waggle, I was there for nearly 5 years, which is a lifetime in a startup world, but went from iterations of having one SDR to one SDR leader leading 5 outbound SDRs. And when we finally did say, okay, we need someone dedicated, they're focused on marketing development and they sit under marketing, they don't sit under sales necessarily, then I think that got a lot better. We were able to divide and conquer and say, okay, you go off and you work in this domain and someone else works in this one. But certainly it was not until we did that there was no good juju there for a while with the kind of outbound, inbound push and pull.
Yeah, that's another interesting discussion. I've had people argue both sides on this podcast at different times, is where that SDR, BDR, whatever you want to call it, where that team should live. And
Mhm.
I'm torn on it, honestly. I think it depends a lot on the go-to-market motion of how heavily inbound you are versus how heavily outbound, and also what type of marketing leader you have. But
Mhm.
curious how you think through that. Is that maybe a bit of a shortcut to have a bit more connection on that team? Is maybe move the whole BDR team under marketing and then the AEs are on the other side?
Yeah, and I've seen it work well at my last role at Integrate. Everybody sat under sales, and that worked well because we had a very receptive leader there who was able to understand that marketing needed to come in. We needed to sync and say, okay, here's all the campaigns that we're doing. This is what you should expect. Okay, tell me what you're hearing from people that are being talked to. But when you don't have that, when you have more of a closed door and you put sales in one side of the building and marketing in the other side, I just feel like things are not going to be, they're not going to be shared willingly because everything seems like a competition. So I think it's really important to understand what type of leader sales is and how collaborative they want to be. I also think it's like a great benefit for like maybe an MDR to sit under marketing just because they are going to get a whole host of skills on top of sales and prospecting in terms of campaign and language and being part of like writing whatever the entire funnel is, those activities, that content and everything else. I think it gives them a lot of opportunities. So I've seen it work both ways. I don't think there's any one right answer. I think the only thing is you got to collaborate between those things. You cannot work in a silo at any kind of a startup and expect it to go.
Yeah, I think one of the key points there, you mentioned in the MDR role, they can pick up on positioning and messaging and writing ability and some of the strengths marketing has. And I think even vice versa as well. Marketers can, they're always pitted against each other, but I think marketers can learn a lot from sales as well. But I think what it comes down to is there's some not common misconceptions that are maybe wrong. Like salespeople might think marketing is the arts and crafts department and they make us pretty PowerPoint slides and they don't do anything for revenue. Marketing might think the opposite, like sales is just cutthroat, ready to close deals. So I think there's a bit of that as well. I'm curious if you've run into that or just any other kind of misconceptions or observations there.
Certainly have. I have been on both sides of the coin there. I think at Waggle, like certainly we were making very pretty PowerPoint presentations and stuff for the entire company, but we were also responsible and being held accountable for marketing sourced pipeline. You know, our CEO at the time had a moment when we were still back in the office before everything went remote where I want to pipe in on these monitors all over the office, like how many deals are here, how much, like it was intense. So once we shifted there was a little bit more understanding, like org wide around what marketing does. But until you have a really like robust demand generation kind of plan, I feel like it's very easy organization wide for people to be like, oh yeah, marketing fluffy. It's about brand. So you have to get, at least from my experience, much more tactical in order to get like buy-in from the whole company on what your activity should be and what you should be focusing on. Otherwise, you will end up spending a lot of time making PowerPoint presentations and designing swag and doing all of those things that are supplemental.
Yeah, most of the effective, or a lot of the effective stuff marketing does as well, is more of a flywheel, longer term. Like you mentioned, demand gen, right? You can't just, it's not like outbound. You can't spin that up and get a call right away. It takes time and it's compounding and it's more evergreen, or like even take an SEO play, right? If you actually
Mhm.
have proper SEO, that's compounding over time. It grows and it grows. So I found that's also a disconnect as well. Is sales by nature is measured monthly or maybe quarterly,
Mhm.
depending on the organization. Marketing needs a bit more time and leeway to build things out.
Yep.
So that's always been a bit of a disconnect as well for them to understand each other, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there has to be a balance there, right? Between, at least right now, I think at ATC, like what I'm working on as the only marketer, everything feels very foundational. And it
Yeah.
is. It's big foundational programs that are going to make a huge difference. But there's no like quick wins. Okay, like let me like I found myself being like, I just need to write a piece of content. I just need to finish something real quick. And then I'll go back to setting up this giant program and doing all this product-led growth stuff because marketing needs that sometimes and sales gets it. So I'm sure there's a disconnect there as well in terms of expectations and timelines and what we're delivering from our side of the table.
Yeah, especially with, like you said, sole marketer or small marketing team. Like I've been the sole marketer. There's three of us and we're
Hmm.
running around with our heads cut off trying to do short-term plays and long-term plays. And I find one thing that does work there is there's usually some sort of quick win as long as you're in a space that actually has demand. If you're in
Hmm.
some net new space that no one has heard of,
Yep.
that's its own beast. I wouldn't want to do that personally. I like to play in spaces where there's demand, but
Yep.
usually that's how I would approach it: is spin up. There's probably some demand. Can you capture a little bit of it? Will you build these additional campaigns? So then sales at least sees, oh, they're getting me a few calls. There's progress here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I can actually switch gears a little bit to that sole marketer part because
Hmm.
that's also really interesting. I'm curious on the sales side there. Is it a relatively small sales organization as well? Or is that developed and you were brought in to build the marketing and inbound side?
So currently I have a founder-led sales motion and that's it. There's four of us on the whole team. In terms of where I was speaking about before at Prelude, which has been acquired by Calendly, it was founder-led, but they had brought in a relatively young kind of SDR who is just an absolute superstar who got promoted to be an AE and then started to be an enterprise AE. So there was definitely more investment in the sales side there. And when I was brought in as the only marketer, I had to resource a lot of things out. So like content, a lot
Yeah.
of different things just because we didn't have the people on the team. But I think for that organization, and I think if the acquisition is an indication of that, like that was the right play. We didn't need three different marketers that did three different things. We really needed one scrappy person who happened to be me and someone that would really dig in and get dirty and not worry too much about the lines were quite blurred at times between what marketing and sales really was because we were all rowing in the same direction. Like we didn't have to, as I said, have competition there. We all wanted the same things. So
Yeah. That org structure for marketing too is interesting. I think it's going to go more that way as
mhm.
well, where there's so many specialist agencies. AI is bad in some ways and really helpful in others. So I think between using that effectively, specialist agencies, maybe a little bit of offshore work for creative and design, who knows? There's just
Yep.
so many opportunities to have that lean marketing team
Yep.
now that we're not all getting $100 million in funding like companies seem to be in 2021.
Hmm.
So I think it's interesting how that's changed and how scrappy that has to be. And we're seeing it the same on the sales side as well.
Right.
You don't need to hire 30 SDRs and hope they all close X number of dollars.
Right.
It's more of a strategic approach, which is an interesting shift. But I would imagine, as someone who's worked in a bunch of startups like yourself, that's what you've been used to. So maybe it's not much of a shift for you, really.
Yeah, I've been through various sizes, right? I've been through the post Series A phenomenon of, oh, let's hire 10 new salespeople and we have this new
Yeah.
demand generation and hey, we have a brand and we have all these things to where it was quite a large team actually relative to the scale of the organization and went straight back from there into being solo. So yeah, it's not foreign for sure what's happening right now, but I do feel like people are starting to work smarter, right? Like it's
Yeah.
less about putting in the time of trying 18 different activities and really honing in on, okay, sure, I may have done this throughout my career. Like historically, it focused on things like SEO, but is that the right play for this right now? Especially with everything that Gen AI is doing and all the different algorithms that Google keeps spitting out. Like it's not necessarily the right fit for this particular startup. It was for my last startup. So now I get to learn a whole bunch of new things, but if I wasn't ruthlessly prioritizing what those things were, I would be swimming. So
Yeah, the ruthless prioritization is key. Like I feel that a little bit now. So I came from not kind of like you did, Series A. They have a little bit of funding, they have some money in the bank to spend, and you try a whole bunch of stuff. Whereas now it's my first time at on the agency side, like the services side, where we have to be profitable. Like there's not a burn rate. We actually have to be smart with the money, and like it. I think, like you said, the ruthless prioritization is necessary there because you just don't make as many poor gambles. Like you still got to make your gambles in marketing, but you got to be smarter with it. And it's almost more rewarding when it hits because you're not just throwing stuff at a dartboard. It's like a more strategic kind of thought process there.
Yeah. And you got to know when to pull off whatever is not working. I feel like that's when you have just money to burn and everything. It's okay. If you're not establishing what success looks like and then being like, whoops. And that can happen with the culture thing, right? People get scared if a campaign doesn't work. But when you have a culture that's okay, try this, make a mistake, see how it goes. And as long as you set those parameters in a really tightly contained experiment of this is what success looks like, this is when it looks like I'll know, you can really clearly say, oh, whoops, I tried that. Otherwise, things can just go on forever and ever and just be a running sieve, which I personally am very frugal and can't stand. Nothing drives me crazier than just leaky budget. So yeah, I think in a way, like the scrappiness and the kind of lack of millions and millions of dollars of funding going in, as we were seeing, is helpful, right? In focusing on what we need to be doing to drive an impact.
Yeah, 100%. That drives me nuts as well. When you see, they've been running this campaign for 18 months and it's brought in 3 leads and none of them were customers. It's like, okay, why are you doing it? Yeah, no, I get that part. That I'm curious. So you mentioned SEO isn't the play for this organization. And I think that's something that used to happen where people would just take their playbook from this worked in company X, I'm going to use it in company Y. And you can do that because the old HubSpot inbound playbook, that worked for years pretty well until it didn't.
Yep.
And now it doesn't work. I think SEO there's exceptions, but going that way in a lot of organizations. So as the sole marketer here, figuring out what to build, how are you figuring out what to try first? Because you do have to ruthlessly prioritize, like you said.
Yeah, we just listened. We just listened to what customers were saying. Like our customers are leading us essentially right now as much as we're leading them. As when they are introducing us to someone and my founder, Nick, can have a conversation with them and that person instantly gets the value of what we're doing. Like that's how we knew the referral program had to come into play. And we knew that even if we give away a certain amount of dollars in order to have that happen, it would be a much better investment than doing some kind of more typical demand generation and kind of lead generation activities. So very much the opposite of the last startup I was at. And that's partially just based on who we were targeting, which was data integration engineers, that type of thing. Those people don't like to be marketed to, but they surely do like to find information on their own on the internet. And because of that, like investment in SEO was key. And it was the biggest driver of inbound traffic that we had at Integrate. So it's just listening. It's just really understanding. And it helps enormously to have an ICP, which is friendly and fun and wants to be marketed to and wants to talk to you when you're like, hey, what do you need? Tell me what would make this something that you want to try versus an ICP, which is, leave me alone. I don't want to talk to you. Don't ever send me a banner ad. Don't email me. Don't call me. Just leave me alone.
Yeah, no, totally. It's my first time marketing to marketers personally at this company. And I also take some sales calls because I'm leading the sales team here. And I really like the fact that I can just be honest with them. Okay, saw you were on the website looking at this and you came in through this lead source and they don't get creeped out. Like they get it. They're marketers. They're doing it all. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's going to be hard for me to ever go back to selling something I don't understand or can have as much empathy for or can relate to as much. So I think that's a key point as well that makes it easier, especially as a solo marketer or a small team, because then you actually get the ICP and the persona. It just makes life way easier, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just it's similar with the HubSpot, like being listed on HubSpot app marketplace. I came on and I was like, how has this not already happened? Like we work
Yeah.
great with HubSpot. Like we make HubSpot look like a star when we're in there because of all of the different custom things that we can do. Like, why haven't we invested the time in developing out what we need to get listed on this marketplace? And all of our customers were like, "Oh, you weren't already there? It's such an obvious thing." Of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
just listening. Listening does wonders.
Yeah. It's so obvious and simple when you say it, but it doesn't happen as much as you think. So yeah, listen to your customers, figure out what's working. Julie, I appreciate you taking the time to chat about this, about marketing and sales alignment. It sounds like we've both been on great situations and maybe not so great situations on that and have the scars to prove it. So it was really good learning that. If our listeners want to learn about you or connect, where should they go for that?
Yeah, definitely connect on LinkedIn. I would love to do that. I am trying to be better about posting more regularly. And then you check out airtrafficcontrol.io if you want to learn more about what we're doing there.
Awesome. So I'll include those links for our listeners. Julia, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to this episode. My key takeaway is just how obviously wrong the common pitfalls that marketing and sales teams face when it comes to alignment. It's all stuff that should be an easy fix, is really obvious, but it's things like mismatch incentives, competition over attribution when attribution is far from an exact science, different timelines to see results for sales and marketing. It's just, again, really obvious things with easy solutions, but the root problems are just so entrenched in so many organizations that the only way around it is to drop the ego and actually get marketing and sales on the same side. I know it sounds like a novel concept, but yeah, it needs to be done. No one likes working in those organizations where marketing and sales are butting heads. So if you enjoyed this episode, please head on over to wherever you listen to your podcasts and click subscribe or leave us a review. It's always appreciated. And as always, I'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode.